Welcome everyone, I'm Dave Hennessy, and today's topic is coaching for impact. Make development sustainable. Let me tell you about our moderator. She is a certified executive coach, leadership coach, and also a career coach. She's a senior vice president at Keystone, and she is a rescue dog mom for life. Please welcome our moderator, Brenda Stanton.
Thank you, Dave. So welcome everyone. I'm really excited to see everyone here about this topic. So as Dave said, our topic today is coaching for impact, how to make coaching sustainable, and not be technically a one-off, be sustainable, not transactional. And I think that this topic, and we ideally want to involve the audience in asking questions later on in the panel, but this topic seems to be at the heart of a lot of HR leaders' challenge, which is you invest in your leaders, you invest in your people, and then it's really about like, what's next? Now that we've seen change, now that we've seen them grow, how do we keep that sustainment? So that's really what we're here to talk about today. And I am excited to introduce our highly esteemed panelists here. So first of all, Adrianna Gabriel is an organizational coach and consultant. She started her career actually at Johnson & Johnson on the business side in supply chain. And then she, after what sounds like some soul searching and looking into what she really wanted to do to make a difference, she decided to get into organizational consulting. And by the way, she's my colleague, and she's a senior partner in our leadership development practice at Keystone. And then David Brendel is a psychiatrist, executive coach, author, and really, David, what I feel like you have such a unique perspective to give to our participants today is really you work with so many different leaders in so many different organizations and industries, and I think you can really give some insight into what you see in those different situations. And David not only is an MD executive coach, but he's also a partner at Keystone. And last but certainly not least is Jonathan Levene, who is currently the Director of Talent Management at Dana-Farber Cancer Institute. And Jonathan has a very unique background as well, where he not only has been an internal talent management professional and leader, overseeing talent management, both within healthcare and also biotech, but he's also been on the external side as well, as an executive coach and teacher. So you've got a great panel today and a lot of expertise in the room, and we look forward to having a great discussion. So our plan is, I'm going to guide the conversation for about the first 35 to 40 minutes. And as I mentioned, we really want to get your questions and your insights around this topic. So we certainly want to have you be able to ask questions to our panelists. We're going to explore, as I mentioned, shifting coaching from really kind of a buzzword to more of an integrated strategy. And really, we're going to talk about the role that leadership, senior leadership especially, plays in really buying into the coaching concept and investment in coaching, and also really dive into the long-term business impact that coaching has, not only on the people, but also on the business. So I think we're going to have a really lively and insightful discussion. All right, well, let's get ready. So I'm going to level set with a question for all of you. And what I would like you to provide our audience with is when we say a coaching program, whether that's for one individual or it's a coaching program that they provide to a cohort of leaders or individuals, versus a coaching culture. I would love to hear each of your perspectives on what the fundamental difference is in what you see in organizations. So Jonathan, let's start with you.
So when we talk about coaching culture, the way Harvard Business School defines culture is a common set of aspirations, values, and norms for an organization. So the question I think really comes down to what does a coaching culture mean in terms of aspirations, values, and norms? for us at Dana-Farber, the aspirations is, what are you aspiring for your talent? Are you aspiring in terms of a goal for mobility? Are you trying to get people promoted? Are you trying to aspire for retention? Is there another particular outcome for which coaching has a role? Values have to do with the values that support coaching: inquiry, curiosity, selflessness. Are those things that exist in the culture and are valued, that are not only role modeled but spoken to? And then in terms of norms, in what ways does coaching happen across the organization? And I think for many of us on the inside as internal practitioners running coaching programs, I think this amounts to, how do you take a traditional coaching engagement, which you might say ordinarily might run 4 to 6 months, sometimes 9 months, and crack it open so that you can take those components and put it together in ways that reflect the organization's needs. So, for example, is career coaching a solution that's being offered? Transformational coaching will always have a role. Situational coaching. What about change coaching? The more ways that coaching can be integrated in a variety of structures and engagements, the more you'll start to see it pop up in the organization in all of its corners.
Thank you, Jonathan. David, what would you add to that?
Yeah, following up on what you've said, Jonathan, we think about the distinction between a coaching program and a coaching culture. I think we want to start by saying they're both very valuable, right? A coaching program might be for an individual or a team or a small group of people, and it's focused on skill building in many cases. Somebody's transitioned into a new role, and it's targeted to help that person adjust to the new role. It's like a boot camp almost to move up in the organization and take on more strategic roles, management roles, leadership roles. When we talk about a coaching culture, I think we're talking about a wider set of values across the organization. And certainly one way I think about it is that leadership and management values are elevated to the same level as technical expertise. So in healthcare organizations, physicians, clinicians, researchers are doing work at incredibly high levels of precision, evidence-based work. They do not play fast and loose with anything. They're very, very clear. If you're in the operating room prescribing medications or doing research to be published in the New England Journal, the rigor is really unbelievably high. But then when you move to interpersonal effectiveness and management, you see people, the rigor falls off oftentimes. So I find when I'm talking with leaders of organizations or with individual people I'm coaching, that at least one part of the culture is to think about elevating the leadership skills and the interpersonal effectiveness to the same level of rigor. And coaching, different types of coaching programs may help us get there.
Thank you, David. And, both yours and Jonathan's view, internally, you've witnessed so many different engagements in different organizations. And Adrianna, same with you. You've kind of been both internal and then obviously external, being able to partner with organizations. What do you see as the key difference between a coaching program and really a culture that you witness?
Thanks. A coaching program, as was mentioned, is very targeted. It can be seen as an event, something that has a very clear start date and a very clear end date, although albeit coaching programs do tend to go a little bit longer than originally anticipated, but there's a clear end date there. Versus a coaching culture really comes down to a leadership philosophy that you are infusing throughout the entirety of the organization. It does take values into consideration. And a simple way to remember it is the difference between the what and the how. The what is what you are doing on a day-to-day basis, and the how is how you are with one another as you go about achieving those goals. So in a coaching program, you are learning those particular skills, that set of question asking, that skill of question asking. But in a coaching culture, then it's weaved throughout every single thing that you do, which opens up people's mindsets and their ability to think in this new way from a leadership style and perspective.
I love that because it's interesting, you know, when you think of the term coaching, I think sometimes we naturally think it's a thing, you know, and it's like, what is this coaching thing? And obviously it's evolved considerably over the years, but coaching really is a tool. You know, it's a tool in which we just foster and facilitate conversation. You know, it's really something that I think can feel very abstract, but it's really something that's innate to us. So it's being able to develop that innateness that we all have the ability to do, and kind of, I like what you said, thread that into the DNA. Yeah, that's really powerful. Thank you. All right, so Jonathan, I have a question for you. So at Dana-Farber, you are partnering with obviously HR business partners that come to you for a variety of different requests for physicians and leaders who each and every day are on the mission critical of defeating cancer, right? What could be more important? And you're there as the director of talent management making the case for coaching, you know, and I'm curious, you know, how long have you been at Dana-Farber now? Is it
2 years?
2 years, okay. So when you came in and really wanted to make the case and get buy-in for leadership to see the power of coaching, can you provide some insight into how it's really not seen as a nice to have, but just as mission critical? Thoughts on that?
Well, first, it's not uncommon that you get guest speakers up here telling you about the amazing things that they're doing. And the reality is that this, you know, Brenda's asking a great question, and it's a process. You know, it's not like you get to this state of nirvana and now coaching is viewed as, it's used in a variety of ways in our organization, some more strategic than others. But I think the one thing that we're working on doing right now to make it more strategic is to embed it in strategic business priorities. So a good example of that is we're building a new cancer hospital. It's going to be the first dedicated cancer hospital in Boston. If you know the Longwood area where the Joslin Diabetes Clinic is, that's where it's going to be located. And so my first order of business when that decision was made that we're going to build this hospital is to go to the project managers and ask just one question. So what are leaders going to need to make this a success? And that was the thread that then I was able to pull and realized, you know, in conversations with the executive sponsors that leadership development did not have a work stream. And I was making the case that it really should, because we're taking people who are already tapped, who are exhausted, and we're asking them to lead a major initiative. They're going to need support too. And I think that's something that we're trying to do. We're trying to take coaching engagements and embed it in initiatives like that, change initiatives, strategic initiatives. So it's a separate work stream that where we know we don't have to get people to opt in. We don't have to get people to self-nominate. We simply identify who is at the nexus of this change, is usually a small number of people, and how can we support them? Let's craft a coaching program to identify some of their biggest challenges and get them to work on them over the course of the entire change initiative. And the beautiful thing is one of the things we're finding is as we move forward in the journey to build this new hospital, measuring the effectiveness of coaching naturally falls out, because it's basically answering the question, how is the hospital project coming? Are we on track? How do leaders feel they're bringing people along with them, and what do our engagement surveys say about that? I often find that when we still do sometimes run coaching engagements outside of strategic initiatives, when we do, it's much harder to get support for it and to be proactive. But when we can bake it into an initiative, it's so much easier.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. That's such a great real-world example and very creative on your part. Absolutely. So anything, Adrianna in particular, anything you'd add to that in terms of like what you've witnessed as far as different organizations that you've worked in? I look at it almost as, you know, there's a want and then there's a need. And needs you can't live without, right? So have you witnessed any organizations that they've really had to make the case to get leadership buy-in on how this is a need, not just a want?
Certainly, yes. Yes, it's a need when individuals are working with a philosophy that no longer works with how the organization wants to move forward. I find that many organizations go through the change curve and they approach the process piece of it, right? Mm-hmm. But what they don't recognize is that there is a triangle that describes people, process, and technology. And you can nail the technology, you can nail the process, but if you forget the people along the way, then that change will not take hold, and you will meet friction each and every time. And so it becomes a need when you recognize that it is the people that are going to get this change over the hump. And that's when you can integrate it into the business strategies that you're creating on a regular basis. When you marry the people strategy with the business strategy, then you're actually able to move forward, and that's how you can get senior leadership on board. Also, if you have examples of when it didn't necessarily work out well in the past, because you took the approach of just going forward with the technology or the process and leaving the people out, that also can help to provide some convincing measures.
I like that, actually. It's a
Yes.
good way to show contrast.
Exactly.
Right? And it can be powerful. When we say, this is what we don't want.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
We tried it this way, let's move in a different direction.
Exactly.
And include us into the conversation, right? As HR professionals, make sure we have a seat at the table so that we can share our thoughts, our ideas, and influence how things will move forward.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. So, David, the next question I have for you in particular is kind of building on this concept. So, as a coach, you, as I mentioned in our introduction, you work with leaders across many organizations. And what have you seen? You know, I think we all know those engagements where it's kind of a one-time fix or an intervention versus, again, this ongoing strategy, ongoing leadership strategy. And, you know, I'm just curious if you've witnessed anything that you've noticed when you've engaged with an organization where they've done it right from the beginning. They've set it up well. They've, you know, let everybody know the expectations. Would love any stories or examples you could share on that.
Well, it is ideal when it's set up well by the organization from the outset, for sure. We at Keystone have done it. You know, we've done a number of engagements where we have multiple coaches working with many clients across the organization. This is not at Dana-Farber, but at another healthcare institution. We have coached all the chairs, for example, and then have gotten that group together to provide peer support in some cases. So when it's set up well, there are a lot of opportunities for, again, this I think goes to the question about creating a coaching culture. Beyond the initial coaching program engagement, there may be more opportunities for peer support or getting additional people coached or doing team coaching or just getting peer support, even if the coaches step away, the external coaches step away completely. And again, when it's set up well like that, either if it's an individual coach in there or a team of coaches working with multiple people, coaching can also have an organizational consulting component to it. So as coaches, we're always focused on confidentiality. We want our individual clients to be able to come to the sessions and speak freely. We don't provide transcripts or data dumps or any kind of report out. We're not doing performance assessments or anything like that. However, it is within the realm of coaching, I think when it's done well in a partnership with an organization, that the coaches or the group of coaches will provide feedback. whether it's human resources, talent development, or whoever the key stakeholders are, about what we're seeing across the organization. So I think that also, hopefully that answers the most recent question, but I think it builds on this question about coaching culture as well. We do see it also as having an organizational consulting and support role.
Yeah, that's a good point, because you're right. When you've coached many individuals within the same organization, you can provide some insights back about some trends and different things we're seeing as far as themes that could be good for, and could be data that you wouldn't get in an engagement survey. So that can be very insightful as well. Jonathan, anything you'd add on to that? I think we kind of tackled that with your first question. Okay. All right, so Adrianna, I'm going to ask you this question. It actually is, these are kind of building like Legos a little bit. So I would love your, again, unique perspective as an organizational consultant and coach. What type of business impact and ROI have you seen in organizations that have built a true coaching culture versus, again, doing these one-offs? And I say that because I think every single one of us in the room is always getting the question of ROI, impact, return on investment, CFOs seeing invoices, things like that. So would love your thoughts on that.
Certainly, certainly. Well, I do want to start by stating that one-off coaching programs are not a bad thing. They're actually a really good place to start, especially if you've not had senior leaders who've had the opportunity to experience coaching for themselves. You've got to gain some buy-in. And coaching, how many in the room have gone through a coaching program for themselves? So we've had a few. Those who have gone through a coaching program, you know it's a very unique experience. It is very different from a traditional training and development type of program. And so it's almost like one of those things where you have to experience it to understand it, because you almost can't quite put your finger on it. It is very unique to you. And so that's where we're having the conversation today around how do you take that very unique experience of what I needed to work on, the insights that I gained and the tools and the skills that I got from my coach, and how do we make that applicable to the broader organization? The thing is that with those individual coaching programs, you are going to see high return on investment for that individual and for their growth. And then they're also going to have a spillover effect for the people that are on their team and also the people that they work with as well. So you see return on investment there. But then when you integrate coaching into the culture, you translate that skill set across the entirety of the organization. So rather than having just one person who is bought into this experience of questioning themselves, to challenging their thinking, now you have an organization who challenges thinking. Now you have an organization who is not afraid to make mistakes or to share their mistakes, to bring questions forward. And so now you have a group of very, very engaged people because there's room for that. When you create a coaching culture, you create a space of psychological safety, right? Because I'm not telling you what to do anymore. Now I'm asking, what do you think? Make sure you take that back, provide a recommendation, and we can have a discussion. We are working with adults, and adults function best when they are empowered. And the best way to empower them is to ask them what they think and how they go about it. And so in organizations that really do a good job of translating the skill set, they are able to come to the table with a unified language, with employees that are highly engaged and are willing to go over a cliff for the organization. They're willing to stay late and give that extra effort because they feel valued, not just as employees, but also as people. So I don't want to overhype it, but I will say that the benefits are truly endless. You're creating a space of trust and a highly engaged culture, and isn't what that we're all striving for at the end of the day.
Yeah, thank you. And that speaks to, I think with essentially what you were saying is giving everyone a voice.
Yes.
and demonstrating that every individual within the organization has a contribution to make.
Absolutely.
And it's really about facilitating conversations, not dictating how to do things, right? And that creates a culture of ownership as well, right? People are more owned into the mission and vision and so forth. Jonathan, what would you add as far as the inevitable ROI question, business impact? I know you're looking at doing some practical things in terms of like a coaching engagement, maybe doing some follow-up surveys. Anything you want to share around that?
Yeah, we run about 30 to 40 coaching engagements a year. We don't think in terms of return on investment. We think of it as return on impact. And the question is, what is the impact that matters to our internal clients? And I think that depends on where coaching is situated. So in the case of the new hospital, if I can show that the coaching contributed to the project being on time and on track, that's all that my stakeholders care about. If another example is we're using coaching right now for leaders at the director and VP levels where employee engagement scores for their teams are not as high as they could be. And we want to provide them with the support to boost that. Well, so then the question is, well, how much have engagement scores improved since then? In our leadership programs, we're just trying to make better leaders. So the ultimate question is, how much of a better leader have we made? And that requires, an instrument to say 6 to 9 months after the coaching ended, is the perception that leaders are better, is that actually measurably improved? So I think it ultimately depends on the context that coaching is in and what matters to the organization.
Absolutely, that's great. David, anything you've seen in terms of you've worked with an individual, you've seen their shift in just their growth, behavior development, and how they've been able to sustain that? Like, are there any particular things that you provide as you're wrapping up an engagement that helps a leader to sustain all the work that you've been doing, or even helping an HR business partner from a knowledge transfer perspective?
Yeah, well, I think that again builds on the question about impact. One thing I would add about that is, although it's often difficult to come up with quantitative measures about impact and outcome, sometimes it is employee engagement scores and or hiring and retention. One of the shifts I frequently see in the mindset of both individuals and the organization itself is that executive coaching, or any kind of coaching, leadership coaching, team coaching, is seen as sort of a badge of honor rather than a remedial activity. And I've seen that shift happen in some organizations, sometimes with just 1 or 2 engagements with an influential, visible leader who speaks well of it and then starts encouraging other people. Coaching for so many years was used in a more remedial way, and that attitude or culture still sifts through organizations to some degree. I think we still see quite a bit of that. But I think when an organization shifts to people asking for coaching, or feeling like, oh wow, I'm doing really great here, they're investing in me, they got me a coach, I think that's one of the best indicators I've seen. Again, maybe not quantitative, but a qualitative measure of success. And then to follow up on the individual piece, people come to see coaching as a highly valuable transformational experience. Again, what we see, I think, in the most successful engagements is people don't just feel they've built a new skill. Now I'm really good at delegating. Now I've really managed my calendar better. Those things are all part of the process, but I like to think of coaching as aiming for a personal transformation in terms of adding value, contributing, developing other people, and not only a transactional process.
Wonderful, thanks, David. I love what you said about setting it up from when other individuals see an individual and the change that they're making. I call it the clamoring effect. They clamor, other people start to clamor for it, and that's always a good sign. All right, so before we open it up, because I hope everybody's thinking of questions that you can ask our panelists here, I'd just love to ask each of you a closing question from myself. So if someone leaves here today and they can only implement one thing to move their coaching efforts from, again, transactional to sustainable, what should it be? So give some thought to that. Adrianna, let's start with you. No pressure.
I would say ensure that your most senior leaders have an experience with coaching. It is so important to get that buy-in right up front. And because you're aiming to have a coaching culture, you need to have someone who is an advocate and who understands what that value shift is. And so if you're trying to push this forward in the organization where someone doesn't have that experience, they're not going to be able to speak to what that transformation would look like and how you do really shift your mindset throughout the process of a coaching program.
Yeah, I love that.
I couldn't agree more with that, Adrianna. I would say look for a visible, highly influential, and vocal leader to get some coaching, who is then able to, again, turn it from a transactional or remedial process and speak about it as an essential part of personal leadership transformation, and then watch that propagate across the organization. I think of the research on social contagion coming from leadership at the top. You set the tone with influential leaders and then watch it grow from there.
And one thing I'd say is find an existing initiative and explore the value of plugging coaching into that initiative. So, for example, if there's a client that you have, whether you're internal or external, who's leading a really high-profile, high-visibility initiative where there's a lot of investment already happening, ask, like, who are the leaders who will be stretched? Where's followership going to be required for success? Because you can't have leadership without followership. And what are we doing to support them? That's what I would offer.
I love that. Awesome. Thank you so much. Oh, please.
Decide. To create any culture shift is going to take time. But if you don't decide that you want to have your organization move in that direction, then everything is going to be initiatives. But to create a coaching culture, remember the culture aspect of it. It is a culture change, a culture shift. You must decide and cut off all other options. Decide that we are now going to move forward in such a way that we give employees a voice, that we make space for mistakes, that we empower leaders to share their thoughts and ideas. It's the decision first, and then all the other actions follow.
Wonderful. Thank you. Great. So, Deanna, I think you're going to walk a microphone around the room. We'd love questions that you all have for our panelists.
Hi there. My name's Laurie Hers. I'm from URI, from the Office of Strategic Initiatives. And I'm curious about the role of 360 feedback assessments in the coaching process. Can you give a recommendation about how to use that well and not just let it sort of fall on the individual to try to make sense of it all?
When we think about 360s, there's a whole bunch of considerations here, so I'm glad you brought the topic up. First of all, there are really two different kinds of 360s, as you know. There are the quantitative online rating scales, which give you numbers. It's usually a self-rating on a particular measure, say creating followership. How good are you at creating followership? And then manager, peers, and direct reports will rate you. And then there are numbers that come out of it that, of course, need interpretation by the coach. And then there's the qualitative 360 approach, where it's interviews with 6, 8, 10 people, and then synthesis of feedback for the person getting the coaching. So I think we think about it in different ways. One way that I present it to start, to help people get comfortable with it, because sometimes it's a real point of vulnerability for people in coaching. They're worried that the coach might be there to do a performance assessment or is going to weigh in on whether they should get the promotion or not. So I usually start out by saying, this is first and foremost for me to learn. I'm external to the organization. I don't know what's going on here at all. So I want to hear from other people. It's confidential in the sense, there's confidentiality on the side of the people giving the feedback also. So in those interviews, I tell people, I'm here to learn. I'm an external coach. Tell me what you see in the organizational dynamics and what this particular person is dealing with. So we want to, first of all, make people comfortable with the confidentiality aspect. And whatever reports come out of it really should not be used by HR or talent development. I prefer that nobody sees them other than the coach and the person getting coached, and that it's used just for development purposes. And if it's the qualitative interviews, there's aggregated feedback that's incorporated into the development plan, and that may be what's shown to managers or HR, but not the raw data. So that's how I think about laying the groundwork for these. And then we don't want them to just be one-off kind of events. The idea is to take reams of data from those online assessments or pages and pages of notes kept locked up in a confidential file, and then aggregate. But we want to see them imported into a development plan that's meaningful to the coachee and that aligns with the organization's objectives.
I've got a different perspective, and I have to acknowledge David was a mentor of mine, so I'm probably going to get dinged if I don't get this question right. But 360 is a tool, and I think the real question is, just like any tool you take off the shelf, are you using it for the purpose for which it was designed? And every tool, I think, is really, really well suited for a very specific purpose. So, for example, one of the things that I found when I was consulting is the Leadership Versatility Index was really, really good to help people who are going from operational to strategic. Is that the heart of the issue in your organization? If so, it'd be a great tool. We've used the Leadership Circle 360, but only for the top level, because we find that the most senior levels, they're trying to go from reacting to really creating. But I wouldn't recommend one as a blanket tool. It's really a function of which tool gets to the heart of the issues that you're experiencing in your organization.
I agree with that, but I would give the counterpoint, Jonathan, that sometimes we discover things in the 360s that we didn't really know were the problem up front. I have sometimes seen that happen, and so doing it early on sometimes does uncover some other dimension on that. So I think it's a little bit of a push-pull. I completely agree that we shouldn't just be throwing online 360 assessments in a templated way at these engagements. They should be targeted, but at the same time, sometimes some open-ended feedback really does help, again, for the coach to learn what's going on. That is one of the real values of 360s that I think is often overlooked. And then also to maybe see some things that hadn't been acknowledged yet for the coaching process.
So I would actually take a hybrid approach because in some organizations, it is helpful if you are going about the process of creating a unified language to use the same 360 for all of your leaders who are engaging in a coaching program. because then you can aggregate the data and then you can draw out some additional talent development insights for what your leadership needs are across the board. And then I also have seen instances where it is incredibly important for that particular leader and that situation to determine which 360 tool is going to be best suited for them and also for the purpose of that coaching engagement. So there are things like an EQ 360 that dive into understanding a person's emotional intelligence. There are some very vulnerable questions on that 360. And you are not going to be using that if you have a leader who is trying to elevate their tactical skill set. So whether it is the organization that you're partnering with or the coach who is making that decision, they must have some information up front, and you as the HR business partners can be providing some of the details around the situation for coaching that will help to inform and influence what tool is going to be best utilized for that particular situation, whether it be a coaching program or a leadership development program, which includes a 360 tool.
Yeah, I would just follow up. I think the hybrid approach is really smart, and we're sort of dealing here with the yin-yang of the coaching the individual and making it extremely tailored to that particular person's needs, and then also the organizational consulting aspects of this, which you spoke to, Adrianna. So a hybrid approach sometimes means, I've done this, sometimes we do an online 360, and sometimes I've done those, or my team has done those across the organization, the same ones, and we do get group reports that may be helpful on the organizational level. And then at the same time also do some individual interviews, live interviews, to actually drill down on what's going on with the person. There was one physician, again, not a Dana-Farber physician, but a physician I was working with who the initial description of the need for coaching was the person's hard-edged, is irritable, is judgmental, dismissive. Actually went and did the 360. What many of the people experienced was he's actually not clear enough. And so that didn't come out in the online piece of it, but through some individual interviews. And again, this was not for organizational level aggregation of data, but it led to a much more nuanced conversation about if you could just be a little bit clearer and people know how to do their job and what you're looking for, they might perceive you as nicer. So anyway, I think the hybrid approach is maybe the theme, part of the theme of what we're talking about here.
Hi, Chandler Ruwine from Celdex. Jonathan mentioned an initiative of more proactive coaching, and if you're going to be working on a project or need followers, what's the difference between mentoring and coaching necessarily?
So I'll give one answer, and I hope you'll get a diversity of perspectives on the panel here. I think it's really important to draw a distinction between the two, because in common language in the business, I think there's a lot of similarities. So in my last organization, which was in biopharma, so we did a little analysis over about 3 months, talked to a few other organizations our size to find out how do they use coaching, how do they use mentoring, so we could develop our own strategy. And the kinds of situations where we heard that some of our peers were using mentoring, one, for affinity groups. So for example, for women leaders or leaders of color, so that they could address and support each other with some of their biggest challenges. Another one was to develop functional expertise. So think about, a mid-level leader in finance who wants, maybe in 10, 15 years, to be a CFO. Of course, it would make sense that a senior finance leader mentor that person. And then the third situation was when the area for development requires internal expertise. So think about, for example, somebody who needs support in figuring out how to navigate an organization. How do you get alignment in a highly relational organization where everyone's super polite? where there's maybe too much collaboration. An outside coach can help you learn to learn, but mentoring can be a little bit more efficient in that regard. For all other cases, when it's about developing a leader, we've found coaching is a much more effective solution there. What would you say?
Yeah. I wholeheartedly agree with that response, especially because in a mentorship relationship, you typically find that there is a difference in level. Someone who's a little bit more tenured and more experienced and can provide guidance to help the mentee along the way, that is where it's appropriate to use a mentor relationship. Versus a coach, it's actually sometimes helpful if they don't have expertise in a particular field or area, because they're able to remain objective and ask questions. It's very much an equal relationship. They are seen as peers. They are not seen as gurus. They're not providing advice. They can provide insights based on some of their experience and expertise, but they are certainly not providing the coachee with answers. And so they are more of a guide on the side, as opposed to a mentor is going to be sharing specific tools, tactics, steps for you to potentially get to where they are when you're in a mentee relationship.
I think that's a great way to drive a really sharp distinction between mentoring and coaching. The mentor is an expert in the area of interest for the person who's the mentee. With coaching, it's sometimes advantageous to not have any expertise in that area. In fact, sometimes I do some coach training and tell people, your expertise is in not being the expert, but helping to facilitate and develop that person's really owning their own expertise. My background is in medicine. Early on in my coaching career, I went and coached somebody in financial services, and at first he was like, you even know what an ETF is? And then by the end of the meeting, he said, I want to talk to somebody who isn't talking about ETFs all day. So I couldn't mentor him at all. I did go and read a lot about ETFs that night, but I was able to coach him. Yeah.
I get the sense we're looking forward to drinks. Is that...
Always. So I was wondering how a coaching culture can then affect the job interview process as you're interviewing.
Well, so what I think, to answer your question, one take on it anyway is, so we are defining the characteristics of leaders that we're going to be selecting off of, and then developing off those characteristics. And so we just finished developing our leadership competency model through lots of interviews and AI and human analysis, of course, which landed with what we already knew, but now we feel much more confident in it. So we're creating interview guides that will help hiring managers, especially senior leaders and executives, but at all levels of the organization, to figure out what are the questions to ask to determine, is this the right kind of leader for us? And what that means in practice is figuring out what are the dimensions of leadership that we care about, which are our competencies, and then the specific questions I can ask. And then for the interviewee or the interviewer, what am I going to listen to? What am I going to listen for that would help me to evaluate whether or not that person's story hits on the most important points? So that's what I would add.
Yeah, just to piggyback on that, I think that when you are in the hiring process, it is really important to evaluate who is the type of leader that's going to exemplify what we have decided upon in terms of how we will live out our cultures. And so that's where it translates into the interview questions for you to be able to determine and assess from a behavioral perspective, how has this person coached other leaders? How has this person developed other leaders? Do they even have that mindset? And does that align with how we determine that we're going to move forward with leadership in our organization? And then I think from the interviewee perspective, if they are looking for a place, and all of these are okay, if they're looking for a place where they can be directed in terms of what to do, then maybe an organization that lives wholeheartedly by a coaching culture is not the right fit for them, and that is okay. I think, when we're talking about culture, we're talking about a skill set. We're talking about a tool set. Having a coaching culture isn't necessarily right for all organizations at all points in time. It's okay to have an adaptable leadership style. And if you're in a turnaround, for example, maybe you want a more directed leadership style. And employees that you're seeking out, maybe you want them to not necessarily take that approach, and you can consider that as you're bringing people within to the organization. But if you have this tool in your toolbox, then you're able to adapt when the time calls for it. And that is actually situational leadership, which is another coaching style tool.
Jonathan, you mentioned different types of coaching, and one of the areas that we're seeing more and more of is first 100 days onboarding coaching due to the need for retention and engagement. I was wondering if you could each give your perspective on that type of coaching and the benefits.
Yeah, and that's actually an area that we're looking to expand because typically when we think of onboarding coaching, we're thinking about how do we help the leader who's entering a new organization. And we've done that on occasion for really, really big roles. Somebody who's leading, in my last organization, a business unit. Somebody who's going to build a new hospital. Like we can't afford for this person to fail, for example. So we're going to give them the additional support to accelerate. The business case is around acceleration. What's the time between when they hire and they add value, and how can I compress that? But the other thing that we're beginning to introduce is onboarding coaching for the manager of the new hire. So how can that person help to ensure that the entire organization is set up to welcome that leader and is preparing to operate under a new culture? Because every new leader brings a culture change of one kind or another. The specific use case where we're finding that most helpful is when you're building an entire organization. So when we're building this new hospital, we're going to hire about 3,000 to 3,500 people over a short period of time. So the people who are hiring, the senior leaders who are going to be hiring across functions, they need a lot of support because not only are they going to be welcoming new people into their organization, they need to build a sense of belonging. They need to build a new operating model. They need to help leaders understand what it's like to operate in our culture. And that's just as valuable for us to accelerate the time to success. Because what I keep reminding my team is, we're going to be floating a bond. The doors are going to open and we're going to start having to pay bond payments. So that means we got to open the doors, welcome patients, and we've got to hit the ground running on day one.
I think this is the kind of coaching where from the coach's side or the coaching organization side, there has to be really very robust interaction with the organizational leadership about what the point of the onboarding coaching is. There's not time for a 360 to figure out what may be going on here and how is this person going to develop more strategic leadership capacity. This is very much focused on skill building. And if it's 100-day coaching, well, that's a short time frame. The usual executive coaching engagement is a 180-day coaching engagement. So a lot of coordination right up front and very targeted on specific skill development. And then the coach is often working with the coachee there on roadblocks, specific roadblocks. Usually these are very highly competent people who are doing fine with the onboarding, but the coaching is to help overcome whatever specific barriers are there.
And I found for the leader who's coming into a new organization, again, in a high-pressure role, oftentimes they've gotten there because they know how to create short-term wins. They know how to get followership. But the number one challenge where we've brought in on board coaches has been to accelerate stakeholder relationship building and to help them think through which are the stakeholders my success is totally dependent on, the kinds of people that I'm going to need to overinvest. And some of those really result-driven leaders, they may not prioritize thinking of stakeholders in that way.
For organizations tend to consider coaching for high-powered roles where people are brought into the organization, but sometimes that onboarding coaching is just as necessary when you promote a leader into the next level. And whether it be a first 100 days or an extended coaching program, I think it is incredibly important for that leader themselves to see themselves in a new way through that transformation that they'll get in the coaching process, and to ask those same questions of stakeholders very early on. What does it take for this person to be successful? What is it going to take for this person to be seen as influential in their role? What is it going to take for this person to let go of the responsibilities that they had previously and truly step into this next level of leadership? What is it going to take for this person to eliminate the shadow that maybe they're stepping into? All of these questions are incredibly important. And in an onboarding coaching program, we do not do a 360 right up front. We might do some stakeholder interviews to determine what the organization or key stakeholders might deem as success and build that into what the coaching program is going to be, and then do a 360 on the back end to see how they are living into what the measures for success were that were communicated right up front. So don't overlook those leaders that are stepping up. They need coaching just as much.
Well, thank you. That flew by. So I don't want to keep you from any cocktails, that's for sure. But I just want to thank everyone here for those thoughtful questions, and of course, to our wonderful panelists. Can we all give them a round of applause? So thank you again, everyone. You'll notice, I just want to make a note here on your tables that we've got this handout. And it says 7 CHRO questions on 7 CHRO questions on coaching culture answered. And you didn't, it's not 2 pages. There's number 1 has 2 questions under it. So there are 7 questions. It just looks like there's 5 there. So it can be a little confusing, but you're not missing anything. It's all on one sheet. And yeah, we'll be at cocktail hour. I know Jonathan may have to scoot, but let's continue the conversation and go have some cocktails. Thanks, everyone.